Alright, well today we talk a little bit more about life in the Middle Ages. There's not a lot of topics today, but a lot of information. Chivalry, Pope Gregory VII and the investiture controversy, reign of Pope Urban II and Innocent III, St. Thomas Aquinas, and scholasticism. Theological idea. Well, we start to see, get towards the period of the mid part of the Middle Ages, they're called the High Middle Ages, the 11th and 12th centuries, is Eastern Europe is basically starting to fill in a little bit. Those countries those countries that will emerge are becoming more organized. The Byzantine Empire was stable for now. They're facing very powerful threats from the Serbs and Bulgars to the north and the Muslims to the east. They're still basically holding on that large area south of the Danube River. Most of Asia Minor is still under their control. And Constantinople is still a thriving, prosperous city. But it's basically keeping Constantinople going is they're basically the key to trade in Western Europe. All those trade routes coming from Asia, China, they're going through Constantinople, and then from there, sending goods out to the rest of Europe. So, 9th and 10th centuries, you see some stability in the Byzantine Empire. They stabilized their situation for the time being. They've worked to strengthen the position of free farmers, and they're trying to expand trade relations with Western Europe. They're increasing the prosperity of the Byzantine Empire. And life is generally settled enough in Western Europe at this point that continued trade is actually possible. You don't have a lot of progress. It's still the world's still basically shattered from the aftermath of the fall of Rome. But information is so scarce in Central and Western Europe that there's a lot of confusion about what the world actually is outside of their own manors and villages. Constantinople itself, a lot of people, visitors from Western Europe, were astounded by the absolute size of the city. Like I say, it's not a very large city compared to, say, St. Louis or something, or Dallas, or New Orleans, but coming from villages of a few hundred people, or manors of a few hundred people, it was incomprehensible. Size and scale of the city and the buildings, the architecture, just amazing. In fact, the contact was fading so much that a lot of people were starting to think that China was a myth. Actually, it's Marco Polo's expedition during the Middle Ages that basically was able to restore contact between Western Europe and China, even though on a very thin basis. But basically, his expeditions able to show that China really is a real place, way out far beyond where they live, but it did exist, and they're able to start reestablishing some of the overland routes to Western Europe. Well, the Slavic peoples, those just north of the Danube River, Eastern Europe, eventually start out as one large group, the Slavs, slaves, the Slavs. They gradually divided into different groups, primarily Western, Southern, and Eastern Slavs. And they're subdividing even further. Once the Germans were converted to Christianity and the craft of Christianity, and Christianity spreading further back east into Eastern Europe, it's basically German missionaries who were working to convert these groups to Christianity. But essentially, in southeastern Europe, it would be Orthodox Christianity and Catholic Christianity in the northeastern Europe, areas like Poland and Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, that area. But In 1054, there's a huge split in the Catholic world between the Byzantines and Rome. Essentially, the popes in Rome were trying to do more and more to establish their authority over all Christianity, particularly Christians in Constantinople. Christians in Constantinople didn't recognize that, and there are increasing numbers of theological differences between the two, between Christianity in Central and Western Europe and Christianity in Southeastern Europe. So in 1054, in the midst of a dispute over a papal election, the Church of Constantinople formally split from Rome, Byzantine and Southeastern Europe, becoming the Orthodox Church. From Rome, basically Central and Western Europe, and the Roman Catholic Church. They're staying as the Roman Catholic Church. The Orthodox Church is run by a man called the Patriarch. Different patriarchs are different areas. Has that same formality of the Roman Catholic Church, but there are some slight theological differences. There's some slight differences between how the two are practiced. But still to today. But still, the overwhelming majority of Christians were still Roman Catholic. A question?
Is that Orthodox?
Orthodox, yes.
Is that
Or
C for Central?
Yes, Central and Western Europe. Correct. Orthodox, Orthodox. And eventually, as the Russian kingdom emerges, they're going to end up adopting Orthodox Christianity as well. Probably because you're going to have a daughter of one of the Byzantine emperors who ended up marrying one of the first tsars of Russia. Well, meanwhile, back in the Middle East, we have the Umayyad dynasty is still in charge of Islamic Caliphate. Basically ruling from Damascus, it's in Syria. Ruling as Sunni Muslims. Now they're going to be ruling from about for a couple of centuries here, and help facilitate Islam's expansion across the region under the rule, and also solidifying its cultural influences. But the Umayyads, though, had reputations of being increasingly corrupt, which was greatly upsetting to the rank and file, the average Muslim in the streets. There's one story of one caliph who swam in a pool of wine each day and would drink so much that the levels in the pool actually would gradually, noticeably decrease. Because in a religion you're not supposed to drink at all. Finally, in 750, you have this man coming along, Abu al-Abbas. He's a descendant of one of Muhammad's uncles. He's a general. He conquers the Umayyad dynasty and establishes the Abbasid dynasty, which rules the region till his death, until the end of the reign in 1258. So for 500 years, it's been the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasids brought a lot of change to the Islamic world. They worked to break down distinctions between Arab and non-Arab Muslims, meaning basically all Muslims, whether they were Arab or not, regardless of the ethnic background, could hold both civil and military offices, was basically been all Arab. And this helps end up filtering Islamic life down from the elites of those societies down to the rank and file society, helping further increase and solidify the influence of Islam in that area. 762, Al-Abbas moved the capital of the Caliphate from Damascus to a new city between the Tigris and Euphrates River, designed to take better advantage of the trade routes. And that city they founded was the city of Baghdad in Iraq. They was able to take advantage of traffic coming from the Persian Gulf, as the major rivers, Tigris, Euphrates, and on the land routes coming from India, China, back to the west. Well, under the Abbasids, you essentially have the peak of Islamic culture. So at this time you have judges, merchants, government officials being viewed as the ideal citizens rather than simply warriors, moving from a militarized society. One of the caliphs, a man named Al-Ma'mun, Caliphate from 813 to 833, considered to be a great patron of learning. He founded an astronomical observatory, created a foundation for translating classical Greek works into Arabic. It's also a period of great prosperity in the Middle East. But still a lot of infighting among the caliphs. But they still have increasing periods of learning and academics in the caliphate during this time period. For example, city of Cordoba, Spain, this became a major center of learning. Cordoba, because it's under Islamic control, it was the largest city in Europe outside of Constantinople. It had a peak in the 9th and 10th century of over 100,000 people. Of course, it's the latest peak. The library it had is the largest in Europe, surpassing even the library of Constantinople. You also have Muslim scholars such as Ibn Sina, or what's known as Avicenna. Latinized Western name. Avicenna is probably one of the greatest medical minds of the Middle Ages in Arab Muslim. He had a medical encyclopedia, among other things, stressed the contagious nature of certain diseases and showed they can be spread by contaminated water supplies. Avicenna's work became the basic medical text in the Western world for most of the Middle Ages, essentially supplanting Hippocrates and Galen in the Roman position. And at this time you have the height of Arab mathematics as well. There are some of the best mathematicians in the world in this time period, in the 9th and 10th centuries. They have the development of algebra. So algebra is an Arabic word. Basically using variables to find out changing constants, changing metrics within certain mathematical problems. Actually, it's an essential part of scientific and engineering measurements, knowing algebra. Very good with money as well. If you're having trouble with algebra, the Arabs are the ones to blame. And also, the Arabic numeral system.
From the Romans to the Arabic, that's what the difference is.
Yeah. We really don't see the transition here from the Roman to the Arabic system until the early Renaissance, around 14th and 15th centuries. But The Arabs are developing this system in the 9th and 10th century. It becomes very important for several reasons. Roman numerals versus Arabic. One thing in Arabic, you have the number 0. It's variation on an Arab word for it. See, Christian Europe, one thing, there's no 0 in the Roman numeral system, but Christian Europe, they wouldn't accept it for theological reasons. 0 represented nothingness, a vacuum, a place where God didn't exist. So it said that God exists everywhere, so there cannot be nothing. So there has to 0 cannot exist. But Arab scholars who didn't see this in terms of a theological issue, thought in terms of just simply counting objects. So they had 0 in their system, and worked out a lot better for their mathematics and engineering because, and accounting, because sometimes you just need to 0 things out. Roman versus Arabic. The Roman numerals here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. L for 50 and the C for 100. Arabic system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 50, 100. A lot easier to write in Arabic than it is in Roman. Ease, convenience, plus the fact you have that 0 there. Base 10 system, so once you get to 10, basically you start over. Instead of having to basically do an entire math problem just looking at the number like with the Roman system. As Europe gathered more and more contact with the Arab world, particularly on a cultural and trade level, of course, the end of the Middle Ages, getting into the 14th and the 15th centuries, again, encountering the Arab numeral system, the Arab math systems, and again, adopting it gradually more and more and more. In fact, go over all over the world today, China, Russia, Arabia, Africa, South America, United States, this system everybody uses to count with. Roman numerals sometimes is used just as a formality sometimes, not as an actual math problem describing actual numbers in a contract or anything in a property contract or anything like that. But it's just sometimes people just trying to be fancy, like Super Bowl 35 or something. But when this starts coming to the West, it's going to have tremendous impact on accelerating the Renaissance in Europe, basically Arab math. But it was after this time period, though, get into after the Crusades especially, that a lot of Arab culture just kind of stalls out and stagnates. It's increasing divisions and dissensions within the Caliphate. Their kingdoms breaking down into different kingdoms and infighting. So all this is happening as Europe was arising during the Renaissance. Well, life for the everyday peasant in Europe, actually, it's not a lot to say about it. They didn't have much education or cultural influence or anything. This is still the days of feudalism. People living on a large land estates, the manors. Basically, they're down by these generational debts and basically have to do all this work for the minority lord, the landowner, for generation after generation after generation. Farming and raising crops for the landowners. Sometimes men have to serve in the military because the minority lord says, okay, you're going to fight with me. Basically, these guys had their own private armies. And these private armies, sometimes they would use to help the king, sometimes used to overthrow the king. But of those the peasants who worked on these manors, the serfs, basically they're stuck there. It's illegal to leave. Live your entire life, generations living on this one manor, working with this one place, this one family, or one landowner. Most people living in Europe in the Middle Ages are serfs. In Eastern Europe, it's as high as some areas as high as 90% of the population. But how they live their life, those are pretty much determined by what time of the year it was. Harvest time, August, September, was a very important, very busy time for them. They had little harvest festivals and gatherings and so forth. February, March, land is plowed for spring crops. Summertime, relatively relaxed because a lot of these crops didn't need a lot of labor or maintenance while they're growing. And so their diet was fairly simple, mostly grains and so forth. These scattered vegetables. Meat was very expensive. They didn't eat that very often at all. Their life was focused around the Roman Catholic Church. Most manors would have a small cathedral on their grounds. They had your religious feast days, Sunday Mass, baptisms, marriages, funerals. Basically, those are very important events, and that's basically all centered around the church. So Roman Catholics practice infant baptism. They believe it is a commandment that infants must be baptized. That's funerals, last rites in the Roman Catholic Church. It's basically a prayer for the dying, basically to remove any last sin, so they'll have the dying will have a passage into heaven. It's infant baptism because they believe in the verse Christ said to bring little children unto me. So, until they're old enough to decide that you will bring them to Christ. For Sunday Masses, they're very formal, but remember this is a time period when, right up until the 20th century, all Catholic Church services are conducted in Latin, whether that's the local language or not. And if you didn't understand Latin, and there were actually some priests that didn't understand Latin, you really didn't understand what was going on. So the motions, the symbolism became increasingly important throughout the Middle Ages. Every motion, every part of the service was highly symbolic. Like the communion was every church service. Actually, we have some churches today, like say Methodist once a month or something like that. Some churches once a quarter, if that.
Yeah, we did our communion yesterday.
The Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, it's every Sunday. So now that grape juice is actual wine. That is the blood of Christ. Lifestyle of peasants very simple. Cottages, usually small wood shacks, huts. So very simple, it's very drafty. Life was very short life expectancies, and not very little medicine in the world at this point. Life expectancy for men is 40, life expectancy for women is 30. You have so many women dying in childbirth at that time period. So 40, I'm 40. I'll be over the hill. Of course, the real drive in society, though, was that of the upper classes, the aristocrats. So, sons of aristocrats at the age of about 7 or 8, you'd either be sent to a clerical school to get a formal education, basically trained as a priest, whether you actually went into the priesthood or not, but Some children did eventually go into the priesthood, being trained as monks and priests. It wasn't until about the 11th century that the Catholic Church said, no married priests. At that point, you didn't have married priests. Actually, even had some married popes with kids. But the church decided, though, in the 11th century, that there were too many problems with this. That you had too many priests who were too concerned with their earthly families and not their responsibilities to the church. Worrying about making a living for the family was too much a distraction from your responsibility to taking care of the church and your relationship with God. And also, too many of these marriages of priests were politically arranged. Basically, priests marrying into different classes so they can, so the family connections can make them into bishops and cardinals. So the church said no more. Now, this stopped priests from getting married. Except there were riots of married priests and their wives demanding the church recognize the marriage. Basically, these priests were kicked out of the priesthood if they didn't leave their wives. But what ended up happening, though, was there were still priests secretly getting married on the side or just having mistresses, as well as bishops and cardinals and even popes. We get to the Borgia popes in the 15th century, and like I said, that pope was right around anything that moved and had like 4 or 5 kids out of wedlock. Except, not behavior the church would appreciate very much today. But if you wanted your son to get an education in the Middle Ages, you sent him to a monastery.
Would they house them, feed them, and all that?
They would house him, feed him, hopefully keep him out of trouble. Teach him to be a priest, whether he priesthood or not, but he would get an education. Usually, not the case of the oldest son, be sent to another nobleman's castle to be trained how to be a noble. Basically, be apprenticed into nobility. Basically, how does a noble act? How does he conduct, basically run his local manor? How does he conduct himself as a warrior? So forth. Mostly the lessons are military nature. How to joust, how to hunt, ride, to handle weapons properly. After his apprenticeship is over, usually about the age of 20, 21, you're formally knighted by a noble. Now, knighting today is usually done by kings and queens, but at this point, in the Middle Ages, any noble could do it. Basically, you're giving a lower title to someone of a lower rank than you. Still a little rank, but basically it's a formal ceremony where basically they have a sword, they tap you on both shoulders, and you are presented your sword. Now, of course, those days it was men only. Women are granted some titles today by the Queen of England, but not very often.
She's still nice.
Oh, yeah. She'll knight people left and right, but it's basically what the government tells her to. It's not necessarily people who distinguish themselves in battle at the service of the Queen, but usually for cultural achievements. Like I say, Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, he's been knighted. Yes, we live in a world where half the Beatles are dead and all the Rolling Stones are alive. But this was the formal ceremony. You were knighted. But here's the problem. You got all these sons of nobles who have been knighted and everything. They're 20, 21 years old, ambitious, energetic. Like I say, they've basically been trained how to fight in the military. The jousting tournaments, you have the 6, 7, 8 foot staff. You ride on horseback and try to use the staff to knock the other person off their horse. Like I say, jousting matches were very popular. However, they were very dangerous because you're using a big stick to knock somebody off a horse in full gallop. And there actually was one French king, we'll get to talk about his story later on. Basically, there's a jousting match in the 16th century, kind of late time period, before they still did just for fun. The jousting sword of his opponent got deflected off his shield and sent upward into his eyepiece, his armor, into his eye, into his brain. He died excruciating pain 3 days later. They didn't have a lot of jousting matches after that. It's very dangerous, but the dangerous part is excitement. But of course, you have these jousting matches, you have these sword fights and duels, and basically, these trained soldiers with no wars to fight, eager to fight one, because this is adventure, it's romance, where you prove to be a man, you go out and fight and kill somebody, but there's no one to kill except the guy who's from your same country who's just made you mad.
Did people watch it?
Oh, they watched it, they loved it. Like I say, duels, they'd actually have crowds for them sometimes. Jousting match was actually a form of a duel. So basically, you have the problems in these countries. Your best noblemen, your best warriors are killing each other. So they need to find a way to stop that. So let's get to chivalry. Basically, it's a code of ethics and code of conduct developed in the 11th and 12th century. Basically, the church helping guide this, basically find some way for these men to channel their energies. Basically, how should a knight conduct himself? How should a knight fight in battle and conduct himself in times not in battle? But basically, it's a code of ethics, a code of honor. Basically, the idea of honor, that your name, your reputation is all important. The knights should fight only for glory, but not all knights follow this code. There are reports of knights just basically slaughtering civilian populations, raping, pillaging, and burning villages to the ground. But basically, this is the idea of the knight in shining armor that starts coming into popular imagination. The idea that a knight is someone of integrity, bravery, courage, will fight to defend himself, his king, his fellow knights, and defend the life of the fair maiden. Back in all these jousting tournaments, they would actually be fighting for the honor of some maiden that they're trying to impress. Like I said, if they survived. Well, so gradually this activity got under control. Things settled down among the aristocracy, but still, though, you have a lot of ambitious men, ambitious knights who are behind the scenes plotting assassinations and murders and overthrows of governments, and sometimes just hiring themselves out as mercenaries to fight wars in other countries. But as for women, aristocratic women had very little power, influence, or responsibility. Basically, their job is to basically be barefoot and pregnant, bear the next generation of nobles. And that was about it. No power politically, no power economically. Basically, they married off back and forth. But you had some women who were of some influence in the behind the throne. Basically, were very intelligent, very influential, and are able to convince their husbands, kings, to pursue one policy or another. One of the stories out of Eleanor of Aquitaine. She lived in the 12th century. She was married to King Louis VII of France, actually accompanied her husband on one crusade in the Middle East, but allegedly she had an affair with her uncle, which led Louis VII to have the marriage annulled. Now, whether that's true or not, who knows, but basically these kind of charges can be trumped up sometimes for a king to get rid of a wife who was either too meddlesome or too old to bear more sons, or if another princess or a daughter to some nobleman have presented a more enticing political opportunity. Basically, these weren't marriages for love. These were marriages of convenience, property, and political alliances. And while divorce was forbidden in the Catholic Church, the Church could annul a marriage. Some would say, for some reason or other, it didn't happen. It didn't happen now as the Church. It doesn't exist. Things like adultery and issues like that could cause a marriage to be annulled. Well, after Eleanor of Aquitaine was divorced, she married King Henry II of England. In fact, actually encouraged Henry's two sons to rebel against each other in 1174. But Eleanor of Aquitaine was kind of a more an exception to the rule. So the book here talks about 1968 movie The Lion in Winter, talks about the relationship between Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. But you get into the 11th century, though, church issues, church politics are playing an increasing role in society. They're increasing problems. That we have the division between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. We have increasing problems of corruption in the church. We have the whole argument over married priests was part of a corruption issue, not just material corruption, but spiritual corruption as well. And so you get to the end of the 11th century, you have a new generation of what's called reform popes. Popes coming into office trying to clean up the problems of corruption in the church. See, the church is very important, a central part of the lives of many people across the continent, millions. And there are a lot of positions that have to be filled. Positions of a lot of power and a responsibility and the influence, priests, bishops, cardinals. And while there are a lot of men in the church who are legitimately in the church for the right reasons, spiritual reasons, they want to have a clean spiritual life, help others, be the good Samaritan, save souls. There are others who are there simply because there's power and money. Vicious men went where the power and the money was, which in the Middle Ages was the Roman Catholic Church. So along comes Pope Gregory VII saying, we have too many of those kinds of people in the church. We've got to get rid of them. People are not here for spiritual reasons or because of their spiritual work, but simply there because they know somebody, they bribe somebody, or some various family or political connection. So Gregory VII comes in, 1085. And I like my focus. Anyway, Gregory VII is convinced that he is what is called God's vicar on earth. Basically, God's the priest, the head priest of the church. And his authority extended over all Christians, including all rulers. Basically, believe that God made these kings kings because it was God's will. And Gregory, as head of the church, these kings must answer to him as God's personal representative on earth. This is a time period when the church was that powerful. It could make and unmake kings. If you're a king and you made the Pope mad, you could find yourself excommunicated. Which meant they kicked you out of the church. Moved all the church's protections, including your claim to the throne. And some kings would find themselves beggars on the streets after that. I'd say these kings to be restored if they properly begged the Pope for forgiveness. If one king basically crawling on his knees from Germany to Rome to beg the Pope's forgiveness, And he had some kings who were so powerful in other countries that they didn't need the Pope's approval. They actually would declare war on the Pope and the Church if they actually went after them. Get that later on. But Gregory VII seems to find himself in a conflict with King Henry IV of Germany, the Holy Roman Empire. He's king from 1056 to 1106. And for many years, German kings had appointed these high-ranking clerics, not the church, but the kings, bishops, cardinals, those ranks appointed by German kings, not by the church. So the kings and nobles be using these men basically as administrators in their different governments. These are the most educated people available, and they've been appointed for these positions, and almost comes pretty much traditional in some cases that bishops and cardinals hold these positions. So in 1075, Pope Gregory issues a decree forbidding clerics from being appointed by lay officials. Basically, kings and nobles cannot appoint clerics in church positions. Only the church can do that. Basically, you just strip these kings of a lot of their power and influence right there. And so, this part can be called the investiture controversy. Investiture meaning basically when a church official is given his appointment, given his office, as bishop, cardinal, or priest, or something like that. That's investiture. And this came one of the most intense political conflicts of the High Middle Ages. It lasted for decades, from 1075 to 1122. Kings arguing with popes over their power to appoint church officials. So it goes all the way down to Pope Callistus II. In 1122, he issues something called the Concordat of Worms. Worms is a city in Germany. Remember, it's spelled worms, but it does mean little burrowing creatures on the ground. W is pronounced as a V in German. Worms. Yeah. In fact, there's actually going to be later centuries an important assembly meeting in the city of Worms, and in German, a legislative assembly was called a Diet, spelled diet. Meeting in Worms, so it's called. So actually read out in English as Diet of Worms, but actually was assembly, the Diet of Worms. Fun language. The Concordat of Worms said that a bishop, a cardinal in Germany, will be appointed by the church first. But after this election, the nominee would have to go to the king and pay homage to the king, basically showing respect to the temporal leader. And any temporal office that is earthly office, governmental office he had, the king at that point would then be giving any kind of symbols of that office to that appointee from the church. Basically, it's still you're appointed by the church, but they have to stop and pay the respects to the local king and nobles. So basically, everybody's happy. The church has its influence. The church is able to appoint its own officials, and the king should pay the proper respects. But it's more than just appointment issues, though. For example, popes after Gregory VII are not really as dogmatic, but they still try to consolidate more power in the papacy and try to centralize them and make more efficient the administration of the church. Then we get to Pope Innocent III, a century after Pope Gregory. He's Pope from 1198 to 1216. And don't let the name fool you, he's anything but that. And so he is a fairly young man, very skilled politician, very ruthless politician in many cases. But in the 13th century, the church's power at its height, Pope Innocent is making sure the church exercises that power. Basically, you have a papal monarchy case. Pope is not just a kindly, grandfatherly priest. He is a full-blown politician, the most powerful political figure in Europe. It's not just the going to praise, waving from your little Pope-mobile. It's you're calling the shots. At the beginning of the reign as Pope, a letter to a priest, Pope Innocent basically declared that his power was absolutely supreme over all matters, church and political, in Europe. Say, quote, "As God, the creator of the universe, set two great lights in the firmament of heaven, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. So he set two great dignities in the firmament of the universal church. The greater to rule the day, that is souls, the lesser to rule the night, that is bodies. These dignities are the papal authority and the royal power. Just as the moon gets her light from the sun and is inferior to the sun, so the royal power gets the splendor of its dignity from the papal authority." Basically, he is the light and the power that gives the king his authority. No gray area there.
So he's a dictator, pretty much.
Pretty much. Except papacy, even this day, is an absolute monarchy. Pope's word is the first and the last word in the church. Except for the Catholic Church, that works because everybody in the church has to answer to somebody else. It says everybody is accountable. And there's a strict answer, strict way things are done. There's an answer for everything. The churches like the Episcopal and the Orthodox churches, same way. Everybody answers to somebody else. Back to tell you some things that Innocent did. King Philip Augustus of France was trying to divorce his wife one day. He was trying to get rid of her for various political reasons, get a more politically advantageous wife. True love. He's trying to have the marriage annulled, which by previous popes had been a fairly routine matter for kings, but Innocent III said, "No, you married her, you go back to her and be a good husband." End of discussion. Philip went back to his wife. King John of England is upset about his Pope Innocent's appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was head of the Church of England. He objects. Pope Innocent says, "You will accept him or be excommunicated." King John accepts it. And this is basically
Excommunicated.
Got kicked out of the church, removed all church protections. Basically, in the Roman Catholic Church, the sanction of marriage, confession of sins, baptism, basically everything the church has done before you is taken away. And that means basically you're damned to hell. Exactly.
So why did they have the king pretty much overrule them?
Yeah, the Pope had that kind of influence. So that's where, remember, all these officials running these kingdoms, they're church officials, bishops and cardinals. Because the church didn't want to maintain the education system. The only people who actually do the jobs right for them, people trained by the church. So if you want your kingdom to run right, you got to have these church officials in place. And in the Middle Ages, the church is the center of their world, the center of their lives. It's not a secularized world. There are people who believe more than others, but most people believe very strongly. This is a very dark time for Europe and society. People jumped at shadows. People believed in witches, demons. talk to the average Catholic in the 12th century, they tell you, yes, they're convinced they're going to hell because they're bad people. It's like we live in a world where we have horror stories that come to life. People really believe that. So the church today still does have exorcists, but it's not something the church talks about very much. Not because they're afraid of it, not because they're afraid to admit it, but it's because they don't like talking about it.
If you have an exorcism or whatever, don't you have to let the authorities know? Aren't the churches supposed to let? I might watch too much Law and Order.
Because you have to remember, you have people calling themselves exorcists, and you have the church's official trained exorcists.
Okay.
And to perform an exorcism, the Roman ritual Romani, you have to have permission from the church to do that.
Yeah.
That is a very serious matter. I'd say, anybody with faith can exorcise a demon.
Well, like I said, I just
people
saw
believe
on
in
Law
that.
and
It's
Order.
not that simple. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Except because there are people who aren't trained in an exorcism, but they can do it wrong and somebody can die. Because they say, somebody who's actually schizophrenic or
But how does that cause them to die if they do it wrong?
basically
I don't.
somebody who, if they're exorcising somebody who's actually mentally ill, they could be going into convulsions or something and not getting medical care. But the church, that's why the church has to give permission when it's done, because they have to investigate, make sure this is not somebody who's ill and needs medical attention, but this is a
Someone who's
real
possessed.
exorcist, really possessed. I'd say, and I've met exorcists before. I'd say these are not people like you see on TV. They're not flashy. So if they're asking money for it, they're not a real exorcist. These are people who would rather not talk about it. These are people who would not be standing in a church in a big song and dance on Sunday asking for donations. No, this is somebody who'd rather be working at the homeless shelter or the food pantry, doing anything but talking about exorcisms. They're not flashy people. But they can tell you some very chilling stories. But whether you believe that or not, it comes back to anything talking about church, a matter of faith. But like I say, it's something the church obviously takes very, very seriously. Because suppose you're holding someone down trying to perform an exorcism and they're not possessed, it's actually kidnapping and assault if you're not doing it right. And if you really do believe it and that really is a demon, like I said, that's not something to take lightly if you believe in the supernatural aspects of that. So that's the world they're living in the Middle Ages. But the life of the saints, though, in the church, that is something very special. Remember, it's Roman Catholic Church. They have the sins of the Ten Commandments, but there are also certain behaviors the church tries to discourage. They call them the 7 deadly sins. There's such things as pride, gluttony, lust, rage. Now there are also 7 heavenly virtues that offset those. For pride, you have humility. For lust, you have chastity. So, greed, you have charity. And of course, pride is something they try to tamp down because pride goes before a fall. So something the church emphasized was intercession. It is to show your humility before God. You're not going to pray directly to God. You're praying to somebody who prays for you. That's where the intercession of the saints comes in. Like say you're asking some saint who might be a patron saint, something of your profession or something. Basically, you're asking the saint to ask God for a favor, and you're doing that to show humility. Like I said, that's what's causing a lot of disputes with Protestants later on, is they you don't need intercession. But for the Catholics, they really did believe this. as a show of humility. And so that's why you have so many of these saints kind of so popular in the Middle Ages. In fact, for what travel there was, and people were allowed to leave the manors, were on religious pilgrimages. People travel all over Europe to these shrines of these different saints, going there to these graves, asking them to pray for healing or some kind of other divine intervention in their life. And so many people, of course, having to spend money on these trips, so this actually becomes a real industry in Europe. Basically, the travel industry, facilitating people who are traveling to the different shrines. Except Canterbury Tales was a story of a group of pilgrims. Actually, always travel in a group. It was 18 numbers. They're traveling to the shrine at the Canterbury to pray to the saint there for whatever they need.
I forgot what it was, but it was pray to the saint. But all those characters in the Canterbury Tale, they were like you were saying, priest who was scandalous. It was all.
Oh yeah, so it basically it was a collection of stories, and you kind of a lot in the latter Middle Ages of literature is basically you have these collection of smaller stories in the form of a larger narrative. Basically, it's just these people are going on this mission, and these are the different people, and they're all telling their own story to pass the time.
Right.
Like I say, some of it is classic folk tales, religious tales. You have the knight telling a story of honor and courage, and he has some tales that are outright pornographic. Actually, I won't come to that for a matter of taste here, but those kind of things they had. You had people going to these different shrines all over Europe. And what happened was, you had so many people going to some of these shrines, some of these cities decided they want this revenue, and these people spending this money on these trips, so they actually go and steal the bodies of these saints and move the shrines to their own cities. Kind of defeating the whole point of the thing, but yes, this is the guy who was stolen, so here to pray. But that was part of life in the Middle Ages. Like I said, the Virgin Mary played probably the most important role in the Middle Ages. And particularly in the church today, because she played in Christian, historic Christianity, the most important role any person could play, which is she gave birth to the Messiah. And so the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, is one of the most important figures in the church. So no, Catholics don't worship Mary, but she is a very important symbol. But again, it's church issues for playing the most important feature in intellectual thought in the time period, particularly St. Thomas Aquinas. He's the most important thinker of the Middle Ages. And basically it's going to be him, and for the latter part of the Middle Ages, it's going to be St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, basically the dominant thinkers. Basically the question is going back to the question of do you need just the Bible or do you need the classics? Like I say, what kind of education do you need? What do you need to study? And so scholasticism was an attempt to try to reconcile faith and reason. And basically, you need both. That's what that Aquinas' answer was. St. Thomas Aquinas lived in the 13th century. He wrote a book called Summa Theologica. Basically, it's a question and answer book on any theological question you have.
Is it Thomas wrote that?
Yeah, Thomas Aquinas. From 1225 to 1274, he was a professor at Naples and Paris. And basically, this is basically all the theological knowledge and thought they had at the time, basically, in Thomas Aquinas' book. But it basically said that faith and truth are not necessarily irreconcilable. Faith and reason are not necessarily irreconcilable. That you can have both, you can use both. He explained it, quote, the light of faith that is freely infused into us does not destroy the light of natural knowledge that is reason implanted in us naturally. For although the natural light of the human mind is insufficient to show us those things made manifest by faith, it is nevertheless impossible that those things which the divine principle gives us by faith are contrary to those implanted us by nature, with reason. Indeed, were that the case, one would have to be false, and the other one of us given would have to be false. And since both of us are given by God, God has to be offered an untruth, which is impossible. So basically saying a spiritual truth derived by reason is not necessarily false, because if it's true by reason, true by faith, like say, if it means one is not true, it means God has offered a lie. God cannot create a lie. So therefore, it is impossible those things which are of philosophy can be contrary to those things which are of faith. So basically saying you need both. Reason and faith are not irreconcilable. So the Catholic Church continued to use that idea to strengthen its theology in the 13th century and beyond. That was kind of still a very important figure in the church today. Well, next time we'll finish up on chapter 10. Are there any questions on